engagements and talks. These are very important conversations that we are having with community leaders, business leaders, and political leaders. Today, we are talking to the former MEC in Free State for Police Transport Roads. He is also a former municipal manager and the executive mayor of Mangaung there in Bloemfontein. But today we are not talking to him about that. We are talking to him as the chairperson of the municipal demarcation board. Thabo Manyoni, a very good morning to you. Let me welcome you to Central News.
A very good morning to you and your team, including, of course, listeners and those who will be reading your news.
All right. Thabo Manyoni, let's start here. Today we are talking, for me, it's one of the very sensitive topics, especially if we are not engaging community members who do not understand what your job is, because some of them, they are told about your job by their community leaders, and some, they are misleading them and informing them. I think that's why we called you today, to come and clarify some of the important matters. Let's start here. In terms of your responsibilities as demarcation board here in South Africa, what exactly do you do in the Demarcation?
All right, thanks. And given your introductory remarks, let me also indicate that, of course, our job as the demarcation board is not necessarily to be loved by one party, obviously against the other and so on, but is to do our work without fear, favor, and prejudice. Let me then indicate that the Municipal Demarcation Act of Board was established in 1999, and its mandate is derived from the Municipal Demarcation Act itself, dealing the Act of 1998 and the Municipal Structures Act of the same year. We are, as the board, mandated by the Act to determine and redetermine municipal boundaries. And I think that's what we will also be discussing today with you and your listeners. And two, we also delimit what boundaries. We do that as preparation for local government elections. In other words, as we'll be going to local government elections again this time, we will also be looking into the wards to make sure that at least there's some equitable distribution of potential voters. But voting district stations and more people than others. So we do determine municipal boundaries. We also delimit the wards for local government elections. The third thing that we are mandated to do is to conduct municipal capacity assessments. In this regard, we are trying to ascertain whether municipalities have the requisite capacity to fulfill their constitutional obligations. And therefore, we advise the responsible MECs on allocation of powers and functions between local and district municipalities. Where the municipality cannot be able to perform a function, we would obviously recommend to the MEC that the function be performed by the district on behalf of that municipality. The last point that we are mandated to deal with is to provide advisory services on related to local government matters. Wherever we are requested to provide advices, we do so pertaining to local government matters, simply because of the researches that we are doing, the capacity assessments that we are doing in the country. That is our mandate. Thank you.
Maybe a follow-up question on just what you have responded to. You have also indicated that you are not here to be loved by everyone, and also maybe politicians. Does this mean that you are an independent body that is not influenced by politicians and some of the officials within the municipalities?
No, we are not at all the Act is clear that we are supposed to be an independent authority, and the Act also is indicating in terms of the criteria what we are supposed to look into when we are determining, let's say, the municipal boundaries, or when we are looking into the issue of delimiting wards. I must indicate that does not mean we would not engage with any party that would want us to explain certain matters. When I say party, I mean the registered political parties that are registered in Parliament. We will avail ourselves so that we explain exactly what our work is and what we would be doing. But to say we would be partisan, that I must put on record that it is not basically our intention, nor is it part of our mandate.
All right. Thank you so much for clarifying that, Thabo Manyoni. Some of the questions might come out as obvious questions, but for some of our ordinary viewers, they need to know this information, because when you talk about demarcation, at times people are misled and misinformed. But let's talk about this. You have recently engaged in a process of merging certain towns there in Free State. Can you talk to us about the decision making and the criteria that you use for these processes of demarcation changes?
Yes, as I indicated earlier, that our mandate is to determine and redetermine municipal boundaries. We started opening the process of redetermination of municipal boundaries in November 2021. And we invited members of the public to submit proposals for municipal boundary redetermination. The period for submission of proposal closed on the 31st of March 2022. And I must indicate, what we were looking into in terms of those proposals were what we have termed classes. Class 1 is your technical and minor boundary redeterminations. You'll find that, for instance, as one example of what I'm talking about, where technical and minor boundary redetermination, you'll find that there are certain properties, let's say around the river, like in your Nwate, Paris area, where people are getting services in the Paris site, but they are paying their rates and taxes to your northwest, the Potchefstroom site. So we have to determine those minor boundaries proper, so that, for instance, your Paris can then get its due share of your taxes and rates and so on. The second class, which is class 2, is where we are consolidating and we also annex. For instance, you'll find that one ward might be in another municipality, but in terms of the necessary administration and consolidation, it needs to fall into another municipality. We do that. Obviously, that will affect, to an extent, some voters in those areas and so on. The other part that we are doing is your class 3, which is amalgamations. Here we are talking about maybe merging 2 municipalities into one, which is a major redetermination. Unlike your class 2, it will be like your Hillbron being annexed, consolidated to Metsimaholo as one example. And class 4, it's your categorization. For instance, if Metsimaholo, Nwate, or any of those municipalities, they would want to be categorized, let's say, to be a metro, then we look into all those and be able to come with a determination. That's basically what we are doing when we deal with this issues and looking into those proposals, depending which proposal, and then we will do the four matters that I have spoken about. After the closing date of receiving our the proposals from communities, stakeholders, whoever interested parties, we would then start analyzing in terms of the criteria as espoused in our act, that is what we call section 24 and 25, whether that proposal makes sense in terms of the act, whether it will make the community to be better, and so on. We look into those. And then, of course, we will then call for public meetings, public hearings, and in some cases, a combination of public hearings and also formal investigations, where we would also seek to get technical information. With these processes to date, on the 13th of December 2023, the board considered the outcomes from public meetings and formal investigations. In some cases, the board has resolved to either proceed and redetermine municipal boundaries or not proceed with the proposed municipal boundary redetermination. Other proposals, of course, have been deferred so that we can have an in-depth analysis of those proposals. That is what we have done up to date.
Thabo Manyoni, at some point before I went back to the province of Northwest, I was a resident of Zamdela, I think for more than 10 years. There was a time whereby there were allegations of Sasolburg merging with Parys, which is one local municipality. And some people were not happy about that. That issue, I don't know where it did. And as I'm saying that, it was just allegations. But my question is here, when it comes to engaging public about these important engagements, how far are you going? Is there any transparency? Because there was a question of you having to improve, at least in terms of how you are engaging with the public about some of these things, because some people, they don't understand. They are even at the current moment, if I can just give you a light, there are some residents in Zamdela who are rejecting the idea of merging with Hillbrook. In terms of engaging with public, enhancing these engagements,
I must indicate it has been a process, the issue of enhancing engagement, and there has been weaknesses. The major weakness is because the board is not having what we call provincial offices. In other words, it has not a regional base where people can get to the offices and get more feedback and so on. And I think that has been a weakness. The second weakness is the board has been relying, which it still does, relying on the municipalities when it comes to stakeholder engagement. For the office of the speaker, for instance, to assist with calling off meetings, availing the venues, because we are using municipal venues in most cases. You know, your community halls, they belong to the municipality, your indoor centers and so forth. So there are limitations in that arrangement, because in some cases you'll find that the communities that will be called to a meeting will be a particular portion of the total community. And you find some might not be aware of the meetings and so forth. And then you obviously, that creates tensions. So those limits we have realized, and we have worked on those by bringing as much awareness as possible, and also talking and bringing to the attention of your local media about the meetings that we will be having. But I must say, we still need to improve, particularly nowadays where people are more using your social media and digital platforms, to use those also in ensuring that we do have as much stakeholder public consultations as possible. So in the past, yes, there have been much limitations when it comes to these areas that I'm highlighting at the moment.
Maybe let's make an example, just a follow-up on that response, Thabo Manyoni. In terms of the engagements that you had, probably maybe with the community of Zamdela or Metsimaholo, including the ones of Hillbrook, what was the response in this instance, and where was this engagement held?
Of course, first, although Haki we are referring to the processes that were before this board, that is more than 5 years ago. And of course, given the weaknesses that I indicated earlier in terms of the arrangements for meetings and so on, and probably partisan approach by those who are assisting the board in calling for meetings and getting the necessary information, we then were faced with the issues that you are relating to about the Metsimaholo, where ultimately the board had to re-engage with communities and those who were not happy with the processes. And of course, not to finalize on the merging of your Metsimaholo, I think, with Ngwate during that time. That obviously was corrected during that time. But as I indicated, having learned from those weaknesses and mistakes, we then, as this new board, which is obviously now an outgoing board very soon, we then ensured that our public consultation is enhanced by making sure that we avail ourselves to communities. And I can indicate, for instance, presently, with these processes, I personally have been to Metsimaholo, I think about 3 times. We had meetings with the communities in your, what do you call it, indoor game center. I think it's in, is it Protem or Zamdela there? But we did have meetings there in the indoor centers. And I also was participating in also having technical information from our officials in the Metsimaholo municipality. You must remember that you would not, even as the board, just decide to incorporate any municipality to another without that municipality also giving a concern, because this has financial implications. It will affect the budget of the municipality and so on. So it's really an in-depth process that we have to engage with. So that's what we have done this time.
In terms of the challenges that you are coming across, especially that are produced by the community that are not satisfied with these processes, do you think this could be a motivation of them not understanding the work that you do, or is it necessarily on the issue of being misinformed by other external factors that are not involved in these processes?
Yes, it is both, I think. It is both issues that you are raising. One, we still need to up our game when it comes to awareness and the workings of the Demarcation Board. But two, because there are political interests over our processes you will find that there might be some political influence simply because a particular decision that we take, it might affect a particular, let's say, political party in terms of their performance moving towards elections and so on. And then, of course, there will be much influence to communities, obviously, either to protest the decision that has been taken or even to support. But at the end of the day, the issue is the more we give information to communities, the better for everyone.
Manyoni, maybe if we add this before we continue with other questions, especially on the issue of political affiliation, we know and understand at this point, at least by what you have said, that you are an independent board. But we know that some of the members that are running this board do have political parties. They are members of certain political parties. In your board, for instance, how many leaders do you have? And in terms of their political affiliation, is it ANC only because it's the governing and the leading party?
I'm the chairperson of this board. I must indicate I have never checked what parties they might belong to or their leaders. They are not actually. I would have known. Look, everybody knows me and my background, like the one that you indicated earlier when you were introducing. But at the end of the day, the issue is, one, that board consists of people like advocates, people with town planning background, academics, and so on. Yes, of course, they might be voting for certain parties and so on, but that's not a determining factor, simply because we have an act that guides us. And I must indicate, our processes can be litigated, and we would have to go to court and defend the decisions that we have taken. So we are fully aware that whatever that we do, we must make sure that at least we move in terms of what the law says, that is our Municipal Demarcation Act, and make sure that we can prove beyond any reasonable doubt when we are in court that we did stick to the criteria as stipulated in the Act. So really, it has not been a concern to me as the chairperson, nor to the members of the board about even me, because they know that we have an act that we have to consider and be obliged to apply. And that is it.
Yeah, those are some of the important issues that I think we also need to tell our viewers, as Thabo Manyoni is also indicating that some of these members, he doesn't even know which political parties they belong to. But I know a lot of people, they know him, which political party he belongs to, and they know his background. So it's important to ask these questions, because sometimes you also be accused just because you affiliate to a certain political party and because of your background as a leader. But let's move on, Thabo Manyoni, to this one. We do have social political issues on the ground and socio-economic issues on the ground. In terms of your technical criteria that you use when you look at these towns or townships, how do you balance that, looking into the issue of socio-political and economic realities on the ground?
Let me make a practical example for our listeners and viewers on what we basically are looking to. Let's take the example that obviously it's at your space at the moment, the consideration for Heilbron. One, Mitsi Maholo, you'll know that it consists not only of Sasolburg. For instance, you have other towns, your Orangeville, if I'm not wrong, Dennisville, and so forth. And you would know that people in those areas, Dennisville, Orangeville, they get their social services in Heilbron. When they go to the magisterial court, laboratory for small whatever misdemeanors, they appear in the magisterial court in Heilbron. That's one example. So the socio-economic factors that you are referring to, they become very, very key, not the political issues. For instance, health services, your clinics, like I indicated, they basically are getting those, for instance, in Heilbron. Look into the economic activities. Like earlier, your R57, it's a linkage between Sasolburg and Heilbron. The majority of people, when they are engaging in economic activities, they basically are moving from Heilbron to Sasolburg, as one example. So even that, it's not about the politics, but it's more about the economic factors that are determining the linkages and so on. And of course, the criteria that is there in terms of the Act, it says also we must look into the interconnectivity, we must look into how the communities relate generally. And I must indicate, there has been ample evidence that there is a connectivity economically, socially, between the two areas, as one example. So those are the real issues that you have to look into and be able to prove even to the communities that these are the issues that you have looked into before you come to a decision. I hope this example, at least it amplifies and explains how we work.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a perfect example, because this example that you just made, it's leading to our next question. And you are just correct to say that under Metsimaholo, there's Sasolburg, there's Dennisville, there's also Orangeville, there's also Krachbon, that is also under Metsimaholo. But now, you have made an example using Sasolburg and Heilbron. In terms of that process of Metsimaholo and Heilbron, how far is it? Can we say that at least it's now at the 80%, 50%, 90%, Heilbron will be under Metsimaholo?
Okay. Let me also add, for instance, you would be aware that Sasolburg as an area, it is growing, and it is growing a little bit fast. And it is growing towards Heilbron as one example. And two, we must also consider Heilbron community, because they also are South Africans, of course. You know, for the community of Heilbron to get services from the head office, which basically now is Paris, they have to travel twice the distance that they would be traveling if they were coming to Sasolburg. Earlier, we mentioned R57. And I think the distance from Paris to Sasolburg will be about 40 plus kilometers. And you then take from Sasol to Heilbron another 60 or so, 100 kilometers plus, just to go and get a service. Whereas if you are moving from Heilbron to Sasolburg, you'll have that distance. But there's also this growing settlements that basically are moving towards Heilbron, of course, yes. When it comes to the processes, whether, can I say we are 50%, 80%, I think we have already published that the matter pertaining to Heilbron and Nwate, it's almost concluded, in the sense that if I have to use your example, I would say, of course, 90% is now like given. that Helbron will belong to or will be part of your Metsimaholo. Yeah, not what? Metsimaholo. When the next local government elections take place. Remember, these processes will only be finalized during that time, because then you have to have councillors that will be coming from, let's say, from Helbron, being part of now Metsimaholo. You have to look into the budget, which will also cater for both areas and so forth. So those processes will happen during that time of your next local government elections, which is the 2016, I think. Yeah.
Okay. In February, you'll be out of the office because you've been here for some time now. But since you've been here, can you at least share with us the measures and the strategies that the board developed to ease the transition of or for towns and municipalities that are subjected to merging the boundaries changes?
Yes, these boundary changes or the measures, as you call them, are not just an easy matter that you decide as the board and therefore it happens. Of course, we have gone a little bit deeper into the issues that we are considering, and I made practical examples on Helbron and so on. But I must indicate, there are key stakeholders when the decision is about to be taken or is taken that have a role to play. One in this regard is your SALGA. The second one would be your COCTA. What happens is when we give COCTA a report, including SALGA, they will start looking into an analysis of this decision and its implementation. They do that through what we call Section 1213 notices. In other words, as one example, using Helbron, they will say, okay, Helbron, there are so many people there, and there are so many who are indigents, and they have then to be incorporated into Metsimaholo, which then means the indigent register will have to be updated. Is Helbron having a fire engine as one example? It doesn't. There will be a need for a fire engine and so on. You know, the financial aspects of the incorporation. They will look into all those and be able to say, okay, which areas are lacking basic services? I'm talking about tap water, I'm talking about your electrification and so on. And all those, they then will be quantified and be approximated in terms of the financial considerations. And in terms of those notices, those will then also be brought to the attention of Treasury so that when allocations are made during that time, the matters that I give an example on and others that I haven't, of course, are looked into and being catered for so that that transition can be smooth. In some cases, unfortunately, well, of course, in some cases, you'll find that you are merging one area with another, and you have workers who were in one area and they have to be moved to another and so on. So you look into all those issues as part of transition measures in terms of your Section 12 notices. It's not just that a decision is taken. After those notices have been looked into and addressed, the minister then can approve that measure or consolidation that we basically are talking about. So those processes are a little bit in depth. And most of the time, of course, they are not necessarily discussed in public meetings. And I think also that makes it a little bit difficult for the communities to understand what would be the impact of some of these amalgamations or consolidations that we are talking about.
All right. Manyoni, before I ask you the last question, let's just tap into your experience and also your knowledge as the person who's been the chairperson of this board. Let's look into the future. Could you provide at least insight on or into what future holds for demarcation processes, especially in our country, South Africa, and how the board envisions its role evolving in the coming years?
One, presently we are finalizing the new act, which is the bill at the moment. It's in Parliament, where we are proposing that this redetermination of boundaries and so on should happen every 10 years, not 5 years, so that there is stability in municipalities and municipalities are given a chance to really stabilize and provide the necessary services as per the Constitution. So it's one change, major change, that we are looking into in terms of the future. And two, we are looking also into having what I mentioned earlier about our provincial offices, so that communities can have access to the demarcation board offices and at least have their concerns raised there and be addressed, instead of having one office that is dealing with the whole country. Those, I think, are the major issues that one can look into in terms of the future. And probably by that time, we would not only be considering potential voters, because the period will be linking with your Stats SA consensus reports and so on. We might then, by that time, be looking into considering the number of people in a particular town to be able to determine the grading of the town and so forth, including these issues that we are dealing with. But I must say, looking deeper into the future, in South Africa, we must still ask ourselves, how many towns do we want to have? How many metros do we want to have? How many cities do we want to have? So that we can then be able to say we are working towards a particular vision, and we would not be having as many changes as normally we do have. Because you'll find that most of these changes are changes that are triggered by people who feel that they are not getting the necessary services where they are, and they would then prefer to move to another municipality. I think it's time that municipalities are compelled to provide services. Basketball an opportunity to say, well, if they are not happy, they will, after 5 years, move to another area and so forth. So the future is for stabilized local government to ensure at least services are provided and there is no changes that are happening frequently as it is happening at the moment. That basically is what I think the future will all be about.
A very important question that you are asking there, to say, how many towns do we want to have? How many of them? Because some people, they need to get services. It's a very important question that I think even South Africans and our viewers can look into it, especially when we debate about demarcation processes. Ntate Manyoni, ka kgwedi yane ya Hlakula, re tla be re o hlakotse jwalo ka chairperson. There's a new board that will be coming in. What would be the advices, at least, that you share with them in conclusion?
One, I would share with the new board our experiences. We have done much research on amalgamations, and we have realized that they are not working simply because of other stakeholders who are not coming on board. When I'm talking about major redetermination, let's take an example in the Free State where we had Naledi, Waupula, Diversdorp, Wepener areas, merging with your Bloemfontein, Botshabelo, Tabansho area to form Mangau. You realize that later Naledi suffered a lot because of that amalgamation. I would not go into much details. So, but what I'm saying is I would then be able to say to the incoming board, when it comes to major amalgamations, please take it easy there. You need to have certain guarantees before you can amalgamate two municipalities. For instance, there is a proposal to amalgamate Mitsimaholo with Mwate. I will say you take it easy there, simply because those amalgamations have not been working. I know that we were faced with a proposal to say Mwate and Mokaka must be amalgamated. These are two municipalities. And we have realized with our research that amalgamations have not been working quite well. So that's why you see that application not really being much entertained. And I think that's what the new board will have to know. And two, the new board must also really make much research, particularly when it comes to learning from other countries. For instance, in Japan, they used to have about 2,000 towns, what we talked about earlier. And then they took a decision that in 50 years' time, they will be having, I think, about 600 or so of towns. And that's what they worked towards. And that brought stability in Japan. But in South Africa, we have never taken a decision. And I think it is upon this incoming board to start that process and do a research and be able to give recommendations to Parliament in terms of the policy decision that must be taken in order to assist with stabilizing local government. The third point is, yes, they need to understand that demarcation and demarcation processes are not a solution to a lack of service delivery. Municipalities, councillors, officials, they basically must do their work, and they can't say the demarcation board must be the one who solves their problems. When communities are not happy with service delivery, then and move them to another area. This is not a solution. You are just obviously moving a problem from one point to another. People need services. They don't need to always be redemarcated unnecessarily. So those are the key points that I'll be bringing to the attention of the incoming board.
Oh, wow, no, I think that is wisdom. Thank you so much, Thabo Manyoni, as you heard him giving his objective advice, which touches into various aspects. It's very objective because it looks at every point. And it is true that some small towns, they suffer when it comes to these amalgamation processes. When you go to Matlosana, local municipalities, Stelfontein, Kuma Township, people are still struggling. But in Joburton, people are getting services. But as we speak, that amalgamation process was done. And this is where people find themselves. Thabo Manyoni, thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom and for sharing your views with us. We wish you all the best.
No, thanks very much, and I must say, it's the good work that we are doing, bringing our communities on board about matters that are affecting them and making sure that at least they become part of the processes of bringing stability to local government and ensuring that at least they put as much efforts in ensuring that they get the necessary services from those who are supposed to provide those services. Ours is to make it easy. Like I said earlier, when I was doing an example of Hillbrook, our people, you'll find that they have major two issues to spend on: transport and food. And most of the time, it becomes a problem if they have to spend more on transport rather than on food. So cutting the distances, making sure that their life gets easier, are some of the issues that we have to look into as the demarcation board moving forward. But your efforts of calling us and others to come and explain the decisions that they are taking and their views are quite important, Kialebo.
All right. Manyoni is the chairperson of the Municipal Demarcation Board in the province of Free State. We're having important conversations about demarcations and other issues that are related to that. For now, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for watching this one. Share your views, share your questions and comments. Let's keep this conversation going. Hilbron, it is 10 to Metsimaho. Are you welcoming them? I don't know. You'll share your view. Thank you so much. My name is Stace Khiba. I'm the chief or editor-in-chief of Central News. Thank you so much to our producer, Bongani Bonks Makanda. Bless you.